Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Superman and Lois. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, obviously, making the transition from Metropolis to Smallville is not the easiest transition. You know, as Lois was kind of saying in the opening, how hard it is kind of leaving behind everything that you've loved and kind of known, but it brings about a new opportunity of new memories and new chances to grow. So obviously looking at the more positive on how things should be handled. Obviously with the current circumstances, they're not letting Jordan go to school because it's like, well, he kind of lost control of his powers, which obviously for him, it's like, he's already got his issue, like, you know, his situation already with his social anxiety disorder that it's like he already feels like a freak, but now it's like, oh, I can't even go because I'm even more of a freak, you know, because he already felt like an outsider compared, I'm sure, to everyone he knew, even his own family. And now on top of that, you add in the fact is, oh, I have powers and I'm kind of being punished for that. It's like we just want you to not go long enough till you can get your powers under control. I'm curious what it was like for Clark. Granted, it was probably a slow process, but it probably, like I said, I'm sure for Jordan, his disorder on top of his powers probably makes it a lot because Clark probably had an easier time because for Wood, he's a full Kryptonian. Jordan's got the angle of being half Kryptonian, which we'll get to that later, but I'm sure that probably, and along with his disorder, kind of makes it a little harder to control. At least Clark's a full Kryptonian, and you know, he didn't have the struggle that Jordan's going through. But it's like, okay, I'll let you in on, like, obviously the moment he has him in the coat and everything, you're like, all right, time to introduce him to Grandpa and kind of explain everything that kind of, you know, ends up taking him to, I don't know if that's, I mean, I'm assuming it's supposed to be the Fortress of Solitude. Someone had actually recently said something of like whether it seemed like this is supposed to be the same continuity, but it might be, this might actually be, you know, even though the multiverse hasn't fully expanded yet, this might be, Superman and Lois might be taking place on a different Earth. I'm assuming it's all on Earth Prime still, because so that might not necessarily have been the Fortress of Solitude, because obviously we've seen what it looks like on Supergirl, but maybe they modified it a little bit, or maybe it's just kind of another like place that, you know, Clark maybe like, yeah, he probably like handed over the Fortress of Solitude. Maybe it's like maybe mainly Kara goes there, and this is kind of his little section or whatever. It might be connected to the Fortress without actually being part of the Fortress. Like I said, I don't think he actually. I might have missed it or not remembering correctly. I don't think he actually outright said Fortress of Solitude. I could be remembering it incorrect, but what was interesting too is the line from Jor-El being like, oh, which is also interesting. I didn't realize Jor-El. I didn't realize that's where that was coming from. I don't know. It didn't click in my head. I was like, oh, so you named both of your kids after your father. You're both your biological dad as well as your adopted dad. I was like, oh, that's neat. That's kind of cool. So each one carrying on the legacy of one of your fathers, like what both have instilled in you, you're kind of passing that on to them, and they're both kind of continuing that legacy. Which that's an interesting thing that it's like his grandfather, Jor-El is saying like, oh, it's good, like Jordan, you're kind of the hope. Like he's like, with you, we can kind of continue the Kryptonian, like, because he thought it would end with Clark. You know, so for him, it's like, oh, like you have with Jordan, that means, and the fact is that, oh, the power's passed down, meaning that the Kryptonian bloodline could continue. He could be the next step in the legacy that they have of their family. I'm sure not just Kryptonians, but a continuation of the L family line, you know. But yeah. Granted, things aren't all that good on the Jordan front, because it turns out, like, obviously he's so excited, like, oh, all the stuff that he learned and everything. But the issue is, it turns out, oh, his, like, whatever powers he had, it's like a blip. It's like even saying, like, oh, like, Jordan doesn't even have 100th of your strength. It's like, no, run some more tests. He's like, no matter what happens, Clark, he'll never be like you. He's too human. So kind of showing that, like, the human side of him kind of makes it so, kind of putting it in Dragon Ball Z terms, it almost seems like he's more like Pan than he is like Gohan, Goten, or Trunks. Whereas they're all half Saiyans. Pan is like a fourth Saiyan, so we never really saw her go Super Saiyan. So that's kind of, it seems like it's kind of in a similar regard of like, yeah, you got some level of power, but it's not nearly like the full-blown Superman treatment. Really quickly, my initial thought to that is, I think they kind of have to do a Wonder Twins thing. I think it takes Jordan and Jonathan, because both instances of Jordan's powers kicking in, he was around Jonathan. So I think it's a thing of yeah, they could use a fraction of the power on their own, but when they're together, they're probably as strong as their dad, maybe even potentially stronger. So that's what I think they're potentially setting up. Like I said, pure theory on my part, but I think that's why it's like, oh, he absorbs some of it, like some of the son's energy, but only can do a fraction. I think it's because they both need to be there together, like. Not unless it's a situation where it's like maybe it's not even like, cause we don't know like fully how the power situation is going. Yeah, he's got the superhuman strength, he's got the laser eyes or the optical blah 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 blah, the more scientific name they gave it. But we don't know. Maybe if Jonathan does have abilities, like maybe if you want to go by fighting game terms, maybe. Jordan's got half the move set. Jonathan's got the other half of the move set. So, like I said, together they're a full-blown Superman. I think that'd be an interesting dynamic and element, especially because I think that will play a very crucial element to their brotherhood and their relationship. Obviously, we get some of that in this episode, but we'll get to that soon enough. But I think that's the direction we're going to go with that. Obviously, Jordan kind of feeling like, oh, for once I'm feeling special because because Jonathan's kind of like the golden boy, essentially, and for him to feel like, oh, kind of like an outsider and everything, for once, it's like, oh, I'm special, he got so excited, and now it turns out, oh, I'm not, which Jonathan's dealing with his own issues, like, oh, I got this playbook I'm supposed to be getting, but he didn't get it, so now he's kind of behind when it comes to football. There's also the angle of he had to leave his life behind. I get the feeling it's going to turn into this, that him and Eliza are going to break up, because long-term relationships, hey, I'm speaking from experience. I've been in a handful of long-distance relationships. They're hard. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't, especially at that age when, like, everything is the world to you. I was literally, like, the same age as Jonathan during, like, one of my longest relationships I've ever been in, and that wasn't a long-distance relationship at that time. But obviously Sean is catching him, like, Sean and his boys are giving Jonathan crap. And obviously Jonathan's trying to make everything seem like it's A-okay. And then, like, it wasn't until later on when it's like, there's a whole thing. I was like, oh, yeah, sorry about Sean giving you so much crap. And then Jordan's kind of looking because he realizes, like, oh, this all started because I kissed Sarah, and that's what started all this. So you're suffering the ramifications of something I did. I mean, I'm sure Jonathan's getting the raw end of the deal even more so because he stepped in to protect. It's not only because that's your brother. You stepped in to protect your brother. So I think that kind of incites things even more. And obviously he tries to get on the field, and it turns out they're the one that took his playbook. They're just so he's getting the raw end of the deal. Plus he had to leave everything behind. But kind of really quickly on that Eliza thing, the fact is that he's like, yeah, she's okay, more okay than I thought she'd be. It makes it seem like he was almost half expecting, like, oh, to her to be a little sadder or more heartbroken, that there's an even greater distance between them. But I think it almost made it seem like he was suggesting, like, she's fine with the whole circumstances, like that she's too okay with it. So it might be leading to a breakup, or maybe they already have been in the talks of it, and he's trying to pretend like everything's okay. He's still like, no, like, it's like, oh, we'll talk later. We'll see. Obviously, it leads to an explosion between the both of them, where, like, Jordan's getting pissed at Jonathan, who's getting pissed at him because it's like, you make it seem like it's all about you. I had to sacrifice so much for us to be here, because even Lois was saying, like, we didn't really take the time. Like, the fact is, you had to give up a lot. You had to give up Eliza, you had to give up football, you had to give up your friends, like your home. Like, we took that all away from you, and it's like, you made that sacrifice for Jordan, and we haven't really thanked you. We haven't told you we're proud of you for making a choice and a decision like that, because it's like, you're a good brother. You've always looked after Jordan, and this is just another example of it. But obviously for him, he's also resenting him a little bit too, because it's like, dude, and I think on some level, because it's also like, oh, yeah, go, Dad, go off and, Superman and his Superboy, which are like, ha, 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 ha. But also, it's also because he's feeling left out. It's like, oh, yeah, you get to have all these adventures with Jordan, and it's like, oh, yeah, like, go off and be fine and happy while I'm suffering the ramifications of you putting us all in this predicament to begin with. So I thought that was, understandably so. It's just kind of like, I have to uproot my life because of you. Obviously, they can't really talk to anyone about things because it's like, oh, like, why aren't you going to school? It's like, and Jordan has to be like, because of my issues. Thought they were under control, but they weren't, which, to a certain extent, he's not 100% lying, so. But along with all that, there's also the Lois angle of things, which for her, she's continuing to investigate Morgan Edge, which you had Clark be like, you don't have to don't do that. And, I was like, I thought you were going to kind of let this go. But first, like, there's going to be a town meeting. I'm going to be there just to, because she got invited to, like, cookout by Lana and Kyle. Which that was, you obviously can tell, it's a little bit awkward in that regard, just because, like, yeah, her and Kyle don't see eye to eye, obviously, about this whole Morgan Edge thing. But especially because she made a scene at the town meeting because Morgan Edge showed up. And for her, it's like, yeah, like, basically any town you've made your deals in, you've kind of destroyed them, and, like, people didn't get paid. And he was like, yeah, but I take a risk just like I'm making a risk for Smallville. But then he's almost kind of pivoting it and making it almost seem like it's on Lois's fault. Like, if things don't work out, yeah, because he's like, but maybe you guys want to take time to think about what's best for you. So almost making it seem like, if things don't work out, it's kind of Lois's fault. And she kind of has to sit down. And it's like, the lady from the Smallville Gazette, it's kind of like, yeah, like, you don't find stories, they find you, and it's kind of like, yeah. Which, once again, it's just that cool thing of like, like, she's the world famous Lois Lane, so it's just kind of like, there's no hiding that. Because also Morgan Edge was like, yeah, like, that's Lois, she'll kind of go after a story, even if it means going after her boss. And I was like, right, I forgot, you own the Daily Planet, so I completely forgot. Obviously, they brought that up last episode, but I let it slip my mind. And at the cookout, obviously, Kyle confronts Lois about, it's like, because for Lois, it's like, you're going to not, those people in those towns wanting to unionize, it's like, yeah, but if they did that, then Morgan Edge wouldn't get a profit. But it's like, so those people shouldn't get paid as much. It's like, for him, it's like, when the town is in their circumstances are different than ours, in such a desperate situation as Smallville is, even taking less money is better than nothing of nothing. So for him, it's like, this town needs some blood pumped into it, but it's like, you do this. For him, it's like, basically, it's like, he's so focused on today, he's not thinking years down the lines of what this could mean for Smallville. It's like, he's trying to go for a quick, temporary solution that he's thinking and hoping will be a long-term solution, but he's thinking from the perspective of, he's been knee-deep in all of this, and obviously he's stressing out. It's put a stranglehold on everyone in Smallville, the town as a whole. So, and it's a situation where Lois feels the need where she can't really press him too much, because it's like, you've grown up in this town. This isn't my town. This isn't my hometown. This is Clark's. This is yours. Like, you've lived here, so who am I to kind of butt in? Because that's also the animosity Kyle has towards it, because it's like, you're coming into our hometown, a town you've never lived in, a place that you've never lived and breathed in here consistently. So it's like, who are you to come in and judge us? And you look down upon us, essentially, which she's not trying to. She tries to write a story about Morgan Edge, but he completely turns it into a puff piece, which she didn't appreciate. But I like what Clark had said about, like, the fact is that he liked seeing this inside of Lois, like, that fire burning about this Morgan Edge story. It's like, he hasn't seen that in a long time. So I think it was just kind of like going with the flow of things, like, that journalistic instinct hasn't kicked in, like, in a high gear like it has now. It's like, I'm sure that's the Lois, obviously, he fell in love with, and it's just like to see that kind of like that burning, like, gotta get to the truth, unveil everything. I think that really, sparked something in her. Because even that conversation, I thought was a nice conversation that her and Clark had about, hey, when it's all said and done, like, it's okay to have so many questions, because he was like outside, he remembered being there with his mom and dad about asking them a whole bunch of questions, and it's like, at the end of the day, was coming here the right thing? And he's like, I think it was. I have no regrets, because the whole point is for them to come together as a family. And yeah, they have a lot of questions, but having a lot of questions is okay, that they'll kind of figure out things as they come. So at the end of the day, Lois quits the Daily Planet, because for her, it's like, this is the first time I've ever been edited. So he kind of suppresses the story, kind of makes it into, more, like I said, more of a puff piece. And she's leaving the lady's like, he'll crush you. She's like, he can try, and bounces. So leaving behind the Daily Planet, a place that she's called her home for so long. But it's like, well, if she can't express herself, if she can't expose the truth like she's always done as a journalist, then it's not the Daily Planet she once knew anyway. So fresh start. And so that whole conversation, it's a theme of the episode of, maybe you can take all those beliefs, those new challenges, those beliefs, challenging the beliefs that you once had, taking all those experiences and kind of growing from it, So now she's applying all that. Now she's at the Smallville Gazette, which the lady being like, yeah, I'm the editor-in-chief. I don't know why I told you, like, the editor-in-chief would love. It's like, I'm also the one who prints. I'm the plumber. She's like, I'm kind of everything here because she's the only one working there. But it's like, when can you start? So that's an interesting side of things. I'm curious to kind of see, because Lois, because a journalist sticking their nose into people's business, Morgan Edge isn't going to appreciate that, but also the town's not going to appreciate it. Kyle sure as hell isn't going to appreciate it. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing. Is like, how far are you willing to go far to expose the truth? Because you're going to piss off a lot of people, but the truth is important. But there's always going to be that conversation of, is it the most important thing? Because would the truth hurt more people? But in her mind, it's like, I'm saving more people because you believing this lie and taking this small cut now is just going to cause more harm. Like, he's not here to save this town. He's going to destroy this town like many others. There's that side of things. And on the family front, obviously Sam, and Clark are doing the whole conversation about this mysterious enemy and everything. Obviously, he went to Mongolia looking for kryptonite, couldn't find any. Obviously, it seems like he isn't afraid to kill people when necessary. It seems like he tries to go out of his way. Like, it seems like he'll blast people to kind of knock them out. But I don't know if that last guy that was running away, whether he killed him or not. Or maybe those blasts were enough to kill the others. But it seemed like he kind of went out of his way to potentially kill that last dude that was running away. So, but maybe that's just at least my thought. But I could be mistaken. But obviously, he finds out, like, okay, why did you bring all the kids and Lois here? And it's like, why the sudden change? It's like, oh, I want to get close to my family. He's like, you told them who you really were, didn't you? And for him, it's like, how could you do that? And it's like I couldn't lie to him anymore. It's like, yes, you could have. And him kind of implying, like, you destroyed Lois by telling her the truth because it is an exhausting aspect of your life, because that means for the rest of your life it's always going to be a constant lie, holding on to this truth that no one else can know, because you'll put so many people in danger. It's like, you kind of put my daughter through that, because also she's kind of smack dab in the middle of everything, knowing the truth now too. And it's like, now you've put that weight on those kids. Like, they can never have a normal life because they'll always, granted, Clark hasn't told them about the whole, there's also the aspect of Jordan developing abilities, because I'm sure, like, that will kind of push things in a certain regard. It's like, well, they're still in the process of figuring it out, but I think the fact is that he's not outright telling Sam that kind of speaks volumes of, like, well, obviously it's our family. Yes, you're part of the family, but what goes down between us, our choices, but for him, he thinks Clark made the wrong choice, because it's like, you're going to destroy your kids. You rather than trying to you think you're going to bring your family together, but ultimately it's all going to end up burning. You end up destroying it. Which Lois, being the contrarian that she is kind of like, oh, since my dad says we're screwing up, that must mean we're doing the right thing. So obviously continuing to show that obviously her and her dad don't agree on a lot of stuff. I'm sure he was all kind of against the Clark thing, then probably even more so when he found out about the Superman thing. But yeah. Aside from all that, obviously it's a straight up battle between Captain Luthor and Clark, because no matter where he went, he couldn't find any kryptonite. So he goes to the defense. Him and Clark have kind of battled it out. Looks like Clark kind of had a better edge this time, because I guess it's like, well, he didn't know what to expect. Luckily, also, Luthor doesn't have any kryptonite on him, so no weakening Clark this time around. So Clark came out on top. I don't know why, like, those are scary moments to me, just like from a superhero perspective, him on top of you, just like punching you like that. I'm like, that just, like, he's not going all out, but it's just like also, and that kind of fits the story. Just, it is kind of scary when you think about what if, like, Superman went all out against you. But it's like, luckily, like, oh, there's the ship. My ship is ready to explode, which I'm like, oh, I thought that was interesting. I'm like, oh, you're willing to sacrifice your own ship to do that. I was like, oh, I thought maybe, like, did you have a backup or something? It's like, I guess he took the AI from his ship off, so it's like, it doesn't really matter. But, luckily, Clark's was able to take the ship into space and it explode away from the city and everything. But then later on, what was really interesting is to have Luthor show up at the DOD and ended up confronting Sam because he knows exactly who Sam is. He's like, you see him kind of for who he is, which is interesting because he's talking very much like a Luthor, because that was always Lex's thing. Well, it's also because a little bit of envy of I see him for what he is, in the sense of he's this God amongst men and I want that power, there's that, but also because he is a quote unquote God amongst men, that is this situation of this is a monster in the making. We can't have a being this powerful. Just all we have to do wait. It's that switch might flip one day and he can basically eradicate everyone. That's always been Lex's point of view in certain regards. I mean, I'm sure it changes depending on the continuity. So you almost get a feeling this Luthor kind of has a similar vibe, but it's also he knows Sam and everything. And so it's weird, which also shows yes, he knows all there is to know about Kal-El, but he doesn't know about Clark. So because he wouldn't know that he wouldn't know that this is Lois's dad, also Lois being Clark's. So he doesn't know about the human side of Clark, which we'll get to that in a second. But Clark ended up stepping in just in time and beats him, but obviously it's just a suit. But now Sam is rolling it over in his mind, because he's looking at the numbers are 7734, but upside down they spell hell. And he's general to hell and back, right? So obviously showing that him and Sam had it, because they brought up the whole conversation again of you destroyed my planet, which Clark's I don't get what he's talking about. And, even the AI is this Kal-El isn't like the Kal-El and we get an insight to what he was talking about. Because which interesting timing, because we're getting this story. It seems like we're getting a similar storyline in Zack Snyder's Justice League, obviously the Black Suit Superman, which is interesting because we kind of technically got in the Black Suit Superman in this continuity. But to be fair, it wasn't really him. It was a whole Elseworld thing, so it was someone making themselves into Superman, a Black Suit Superman, but it wasn't actually that. But it looks like it's an apocalyptic future where basically Superman's kind of ruling the world. It seems like they're going an injustice storyline, which obviously is if Superman lost everything and kind of crossed the line. So he might be kind of, and very similar to the Nightmare world in might be a combination of two, might be more so one than the other. What they're going within the like I said, Zack Snyder's Justice League with the Nightmare sequence from Batman v Superman of he's kind of become a dictator. So it seems like that's what happened in that world. It's like I said with the Justice League, it's having lost everything that he lost, the things that kept him human, which could have been Lois or we don't know. All that he lost, it probably ripped away the humanity, and he's just Superman full time. That might be why Luthor doesn't know. He doesn't really know all there is to know about the human side of Clark, because at whatever point that is, he casts aside that we don't know the ins and outs. So seeing what we've seen, it seems like we're not dealing with an alternate timeline, because if we were, I feel like Sam would have been a little bit older and not the same age, because I feel like we would have found the equivalency of that Luthor. So we are dealing with probably a multiverse thing, he's from a different universe entirely, where Clark went, let's face it, ape shit, and he's a dictator, and he's a murderer, and he's the most powerful being with no, in that universe, probably nothing and no one can stop him, because there's probably no kryptonite left in that universe, that probably because Clark was I'm gonna make sure to destroy anything that could ever stop me or get in my way. So hell, for all we know, in that continuity, he might have, whatever heroes exist in that continuity, for all we know, he might have killed them along with any other villains. Which is interesting, because obviously in this continuity, because of Crisis on Infinite Earths, we got that with Batman from Earth 99. Did a kind of similar thing. Not all his villains, but some of them, which is also ironic too, because he also killed his Superman as well. So that's just interesting. But I think it's, it's just for him, it's just this Clark is just one step away from becoming that as well. All he sees is the monster Kryptonian he's known, and not the human element. But, it's he's because he's trying to tell Sam Clark isn't like us, he isn't human, But it's the thing is, Clark can be more human than more other people. His family is his humanity. And that might be to the point later on where Luthor might cross that line trying to kill them, and that might inadvertently push Clark to become the monster he believes Clark to be. But his family keeps him what he's going, once again, we don't know what that continuity is fully whatever world or time. Well, like I said, I believe other world he's from, like what necessarily went down to push Clark to become what he is. But we'll have to wait and see on that front. But he's also going to be kind of low-key for a little while, Luthor, just because he has to also rebuild his suit, what that necessarily is going to look like. I wonder, is he inadvertently going to get, probably try and get... Well, it'd be interesting if he ended up spending time... Well, okay, he wouldn't even know where to start necessarily, would he? About where to even look for Clark. Because I was about to say, what if he ended up meeting Clark and they became friends? I think that'd be kind of interesting, like a little bit similar to Smallville, where they started off as friends and eventually became the arch enemies they're destined to be. What if it's kind of a thing if he ends up meeting Clark and befriending Clark, not realizing he's Superman, and that becomes a whole... I think that'd be an interesting situation. Once again, some people are going to probably make that argument about I meant to talk about it last episode, but I'll talk about this one, the whole thing of Jordan kind of implied I've seen Superman, there's no way you can beat him, because, and I've talked about this in a video, everyone thinks about it, it's it's a comic book thing of all it takes is him taking off his glasses and no one realizes it's him. Obviously you have to make it, you have to suspend some disbelief, because obviously when that was created, that was probably more obviously Superman's been around a long time, so maybe that was more of an secret identity back then than it is now. But I think how they've explained it in certain continuities is that basically it's not just putting on the glasses, he changes a lot about himself. He becomes more clumsy, and because as Superman he stands straight, he's confident. As Clark, he's I'm sorry, I'm fumbling. He seems like he's kind of a loser that doesn't have his shit together. It's kind of like he makes himself seem unassuming, because as Clark Kent, he can blend into the background. People it's Clark, whatever. But as Superman, he has this presence about him. Someone had actually suggested, I was listening to The Weekly Planet, and James and Mason, might have been Mason that brought it up about potentially him having a certain force field around him that kind of blurs his identity, certain people, and then it's that's why people can't see. It's a perception field or something like that. I think it's more so just it's meant to be how he acts and how he behaves. It's you're so not Superman, there's no way you could be Superman. But like I said, he also bleeds into the background. That's kind of the whole point, to be unassuming, not to stand out too much. So that was just kind of my thought about it. So like I said, so I think if they met, it could still fit of him not realizing Clark is Superman, But like I said, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But obviously, Jordan's back at school. A lot of changes all around for everyone, kind of getting adjusted to the new situation. Clark promising to be there for, it's he thought everything was going to be okay, because he thought, I wasn't there, but I was out being Superman. But he thought you guys would be fine, but you're not. So he's I am going to try and find the balance it all, because I can't just throw away, abandon the world, but I also can't abandon you two either. So I'm going to try and figure this whole thing out. Obviously still not letting him know he's technically being hunted, because it's that's nothing new, but also this is a foe who knows so much about him already. Complicates things, and probably doesn't want to freak the kids out. So like I said, these are just some of the things kind of going through my mind right now. I'm really interested to see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.